Good morning, everyone, and welcome to all of you who are connecting to our debate on emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, and supercomputing. After yesterday's debate on the European data strategy, which many of you joined, today we'll discuss the state of play of AI and its applications in Europe, also in the light of the pandemic, and of the state of play of supercomputing, which seems to be what will empower a new generation of AI and position Europe in the global tech race. Today's debate is co-hosted by MEPs Pilar del Castillo and Eva Kaili, both leading MEPs in digital policy. Welcome to both of you. As you know, Pilar is the chair of EIF, an MEP with the EPP group from Spain, and a member of the ITRE committee, among other things. Eva is an MEP with the S&D group from Greece. She's a member of the ITRE committee as well, and among other things, the chair of STOA, the European Parliament's Science and Technology Options Assessment Body. Today, we're also joined by prominent speakers who are experts of AI and supercomputing. I give a warm welcome to all our speakers, starting with Lucilla Sioli, Director of Artificial Intelligence and Digital Industry at DG CNECT, a European Commission. Benvenuta, Lucilla. We're also joined by Dr. Bughin, CTO at the Ascend Computing business of Huawei, to Dr. Alessandro Curioni, Head of IBM Research in Europe and Director of the IBM Research Lab in Zurich. Buongiorno. And last but not least, Dr. Jacques Bughin, Professor at the Solvay Business School, CEO at the Machaon Advisory, Advisor at Fortino Capital, and venture partner at Antler. I hope I didn't forget anything. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. We expect over 80 participants connecting with us today, including members of our forum, of course, but also representatives from EU institutions. As always, after listening to our chairing MEPs and to our speakers, there will be an exchange of views with the audience, which will take place in the Q&A session. You'll only have to click on the button that you will find on your left-hand side to join the Q&A session when the time will come. Or otherwise, click on the link that we'll share in the chat box when it's time. We're now ready to start. Pilar and Eva, the floor is yours. Over to Pilar first.
Dear colleagues and EIF members and members of the panel, which we have, as we usually have, a really outstanding panel in this occasion as well. Thank you very much to you all for being with us in today's debates on AI and supercomputing. And we are all very much aware that artificial intelligence is not an entirely new concept, and that it is due to the current massive set of digital data, together with today's sophistication of processors, that it is the economic potential of AI has never been bigger. From this perspective, it is clear that Europe must move up a gear and ensure that data can flow across sectors within EU-wide common and interoperable data spaces. However, Europe must also promote investment in next generation tools and infrastructure to store and process data. This is precisely the objective of this morning's debate, to stress the link between AI and computing capacity. Obviously, we cannot have one without the other, and consequently, we must focus on reinforcing capacities in high performance computing. Indeed, it must no longer be acceptable that while the EU currently consumes 1/3 of high performance computing resources worldwide, it provides only around 5% of it, pushing then the SMEs, scientists, and engineers to turn massively to computing resources outside Europe. This is why the recent European Council conclusions of the 2nd of October are very welcome, not only because at least 20% of the funds under the Recovery and Resilience Facility will be made available for the digital transition, also because the European Council expressly indicated that these funds should help advance objectives such as foreseeing supercomputers. In this context, my expectations for today's debate, it is to highlight the importance of supercomputing to fully exploit AI and to take stock of what is happening at the global level as well in this debate. We have, as I said, an excellent panel, very interesting people working on this sector from different perspectives, and I am absolutely sure that will not be disappointed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Pilar. The floor is yours, Eva. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you first, Maria, for managing to work with EIF so well, besides the challenge that we face with the pandemic, and also my colleague Pilar Castillo, because we managed actually to top the digital policy in the Parliament, and I think this is because we also have the understanding and we connect to what's happening in the market, what citizens are scared of or worried about, and at the same time we try to translate that into politics and legislation. So we have excellent speakers to discuss, I think, a bit more on the different sides, on the technical and operational, how the Commission is going to work. And actually they've been working quite hard during the summer, that we have I think an analysis of the ethics that we need to understand, and all the social challenges that we might face. And of course, we do have the geopolitics of new technologies, because after the pandemic, we realized that these global challenges that we face, we can only respond to them again globally with, of course, decentralizing the solutions. I see the info and the biotech now are being accelerated. This pandemic has been a catalyst, and we have to invest both in software and hardware in order to achieve the maximum capacity and capability to use these technologies to produce very fast treatments, because we will use the proper data in order to understand the pattern of a disease. And I want to start with an example of the problems we face. So, you know, ECDC is the European Center for Disease Control and Prevention of the European Union, actually having in their hands 80% of the data of what happened with COVID from EU. The problem that they had was, like, we didn't have common standards. So the data they gathered, they were completely different. All the data sets, they could not be combined. There was like not enough time to be able to set the standards from the beginning. They had data from the media, different kinds of sources. So in the end, these data are not super useful for scientists. And this is why actually it's taking too long to understand how this disease is working. Having also supercomputers in place would mean that we would have the capacity to get more data and move more fast into understanding the solutions with different metrics, with plenty of metrics, like environmental, if we had health, chronic diseases, and also even the DNA of each person that managed to overcome or not this disease. So what we're trying to do now in 2020 and 2021 would be to develop a strategy, a holistic strategy on AI, and you saw the white paper, and how we can set ethics by law and by design. Secondly, we have to decide about the data governance, which actually means, and I like the Commission's approach, high risk and low risk. High risk, we need extra safety guards because we don't want access to our private data. We definitely need SMEs and startups to have access to low risk data in order to create like innovative solutions and create like a better ecosystem where competition can actually work, and we don't just have the big ones taking over. And finally, we have digital finance, because cross-border payments was also a big challenge during this pandemic. We saw the problems with supply chains. We saw the problems inside our digital single market. We still have shortcomings to manage, to overcome, and barriers to remove. And of course, we have the industrial strategy. This means we have to definitely invest into hardware made in EU. So these are the main challenges, trying on the same time, as I said, to go and follow the principles and the fundamental values that EU has. So we cannot compromise privacy to have safety. If you remember the discussion about contact tracing apps, we saw that people were ready to give up their privacy in order to remain safe. So the location, their health data, everything. I think that our responsibility as European politicians, and also what differentiates us from US and China, is that we don't want to compromise privacy in order to have safety. We can have both. GDPR was our compass to the right direction. So in the end, I've started under STOA, the Science and Technology Committee, the Center for AI. So we're going to try to work with OECD, IEEE, even UN, to develop data standards, because imagine if we have access to good quality of data, not just in the EU, but beyond. I think basically we're following what G20 was trying to do, and we don't want to compromise. Actually, we want to be the ones leading by, as I said, by our European values, how we want to design our future and what are the by default aspects that we want to have inside the algorithm. So an algorithm is just an equation where you decide the metrics and you decide how much data you will put there. So the quality is very important in order to have a solution to a problem. But if you manage to achieve super intelligence, then you might even have an automation of the decision-making process. So you understand that we have definitely to avoid having harmful AI getting out of control. And this is what people are worried mostly about. So finally, we are ready to invest a lot. I worked on InvestEU file, also on AI infrastructure. And I think we have a very good understanding of what we have to overcome. As I said, we have to harmonize our market, and we have to develop furthermore the ecosystem with digital innovation hubs, skills for everyone, and to attract also talent. And this would help us also create jobs. And we need to be able to move really fast because this is again a global race. And what we want to achieve is to influence and impact with quality. So I think these are the things we also discuss with our excellent speakers, very strong industries, quite controversial discussion the last time, and with an excellent world-class thinker, I would say, Jacques Bughin. So Maria Rosa, I don't want to take more of the time because I think we can have a very interesting Q&A to follow.
Thank you very much, Eva, and thanks to both yourself and Pilar for taking the lead on these issues as MEPs and for opening with very clear messages. I would like now to bring in the European Commission with Lucilla. The floor is yours, Lucilla.
Thank you for inviting me to this event on AI and supercomputers. And I think it's very important to notice this let's say fusion or getting together of these two technologies. Now it's not new because this generation of AI has really emerged because of the improvements in computing power on top of many more data being available. But the computing requirements are very, very important for AI and are very important also for the next generation of AI, which is going to be increasingly based on maybe very large sets of unstructured data. So nowadays, supercomputers are used for AI, in particular when it's about making simulations or making model-based approaches to very, very large databases with many, many variables. And this notably happens in particular in the area of healthcare or in the area of environment, because the meteorological data sets, for example, are also very, very large. It can be used, for example, for cities, for making urban life much more sustainable, and managing traffic and managing many other aspects that are relevant to our urban life. So I think that this, the capabilities of running AI on supercomputers is going to bring increasing benefits. Of course, you don't need supercomputers for every application of AI, but I think that even if we will not need the supercomputers, certainly we will need increasing faster processors also for other applications that are not necessarily supercomputers. But if you think of AI embedded in the car or AI embedded at the edge in manufacturing companies, this AI will need higher computing capabilities and therefore processors with higher capabilities, and certainly also more energy efficient, because all this processing of data is very useful, but it is also uses a lot of energy. And so we have to come up with more energy efficient approaches from this point of view. I want to remind that, sometimes people say, but maybe AI didn't really help in the COVID, and we have just been mentioning the COVID pandemic. But I want to remind exactly in this session we are having that actually an application of AI into a supercomputer has helped an achievement that was made in the European Union, and by the way, also on the basis of European programs, because the EU funded Escalate for COV project started in March 2020, combined supercomputing and AI to identify the drug candidates that could help in curing the COVID. And so there was an ultra high performance virtual screening platform that took more than 1,000 existing drugs and screened them against a very large chemical database with more 3 million molecules per second. So this is the kind of processing that supercomputers can do. And the result of that is that there were 7,000 molecules pre-selected, tested again in vitro, and then we came up with raloxifene. This is a drug that is already used nowadays for osteoporosis, and it's a very promising molecule that can be used for treating COVID-19 patients. It's not a vaccine, it's a cure. And but while we're waiting for the vaccine, of course, this search for drugs is very, very important, and supercomputers, as was said earlier, with AI are very useful for that. Then AI in COVID has been used in other ways. It's been used for reading CT scans, so medical imaging, identifying through CT scans if patients were infected with COVID or with other pneumonia, the extent of the infection, and so on. So AI is not being the solution to COVID. It's not a vaccine, but it has been used in many different ways to be able to fight COVID, including in the tracing apps. Excuse me. I then would like to conclude simply remembering that the European Commission is investing in the next generation of supercomputers. We have a joint undertaking called EUR-HPC with member states and industry, where we invest in supercomputers in the European Union. We already started reversing the trend and having in the European soil some of the most powerful supercomputers in the world. And we are now moving towards the exascale supercomputing. So EUR-HPC in the next multi-annual financial framework will be very important from this effect. And we also invest in AI in that context, as well as we invest in AI in a dedicated public-private partnership. So these are our investment in research and in deployment as well. And we will also be looking at the regulatory framework. Like Eva said, we are interested in a trustworthy approach to artificial intelligence, and we will come at the beginning of next year with a proposal for a regulatory framework for a human-centric artificial intelligence based on requirements that have been already proposed in the white paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucilla, for this very interesting update. And now I would like to bring in the industry sector perspective with Bin, and then followed by Alessandro. Bin, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Very well.
Yeah, okay, great. And hope everybody is well during this pandemic. And yeah, I agree with previous speakers with that AI is helping fighting COVID. And we see a lot of cases, especially in China, we are using AI in hospitals and in public health sectors to fight with the COVID pandemic. And especially we are seeing the trend of AI and HPC are converging, especially the new applications are using AI capabilities to solve the traditional supercomputer problems. However, this will present a lot of challenges for our computing architecture. I will think from the fundamental technology part that for solving those kind of huge challenges of computing requirements, which will require that we reorganize the fundamental computing architecture, especially from the processing elements part, because the AI processing pattern is different. We see that AI, especially deep learning, require different processing pattern with the traditional supercomputers. And the traditional supercomputers is designed for massively parallel processing architecture. However, AI, especially deep learning, is a tensor processing. And those kind of different processing requirements will dramatically change our supercomputers architecture. And at Huawei, especially in industrial, we are redesign the whole processing architecture from scratch up. And we can see that we are using a different processing cores with traditional CPUs to build our AI supercomputers. And those will require a lot of investment. And also the processing software stack and algorithms and runtimes, compilers, debuggers, all the tools will be rebuilt. And this will help the industry and also the academia and researchers to facilitate their AI researches. So, and we can see not only the supercomputers, but we see the cloud with AI. And because we are using the cloud capabilities to process supercomputer problems, and also the fusion of cloud computing and AI computing and supercomputer. And we see those kind of trends in technology. Also, we see the collaboration between cloud computing and edge computing, because if AI wants to help improve our industry and society, we need to put AI computing capacities to edge computing environment. And this will dramatically change the society. And we see that we can use robotics to help moving goods during the pandemic instead of using people to avoid contacting each other. And this will help a lot of fields. And also the privacy. And we see AI is a new technology, and we can, because there are lots of data involved, and this will raise the risks of the privacy problem. So we need to use the technologies to protect the privacy and also the safety of our data. And we are developing different technologies for those kind of targets. For example, we are using encryptions and also the privacy protection technologies for trusted platforms, and also other technologies for helping to protect the data privacy. And also we require standards, because there will be different data formats and data streams and algorithms and even processing architectures. We need a unified standard for interoperability and collaboration between different sectors. And also, we think there will be more investments for AI applications with supercomputing. Because we see the trend of AI merging with supercomputing, and we urging that different sectors who will invest more in these fields. And as long as we invest more in these fields, and this will help to improve the researches on AI using supercomputer capacities. Also, worthwhile, we can use AI to solve supercomputer problems. And we see AI is the next exascale for supercomputing. And we see it is not a trend, it is the reality right now. And we see different countries are investing in this sector very heavily, and not only the US, but also China and the European. And so, so we will see that AI together with supercomputing will create a new era for computing technologies. And in the industries, we are developing all those kind of new technologies for supporting those trends. And so we believe that AI with emerging supercomputer technologies will bring a new, better world together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bughin, for sharing the technology challenges, but also the opportunities that we have ahead of us. I would like to give the floor to Alessandro now. Over to you, Alessandro.
Good morning, everybody. I would like to share a presentation that will help me to convey my messages. Give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm very, very happy to be here and discuss about artificial intelligence supercomputing. Look, what has happened, right, with this coronavirus crisis that has been one of the worst crises that we had in the last 100 years. This created really a wake-up calls for us, right? Because we do have all these exponential technology that we do believe we should invest, right? And this crisis is telling us we have to do better on how we bring together all these things really to help us to solve and tackle crises like the coronavirus, okay? We understand that, you know, we cannot wait 10 years and invest 4 billion to develop a single drugs to solve a single problem, right? So this crisis is telling us, to all of us, that we do need really to create a new approach to accelerate scientific discovery. And we have been saying, right, in the past decade that supercomputing, simulation, and AI can be a solution of these problems. But we have to do things better. And one thing that I want to make sure that everybody understand, AI is one super powerful instrument, but is only one part of the solution. As we have said, right, in order to have AI a solution, right, we need to create the right ecosystem that include, you know, the data, how we can bring together all these data, how we can share this data to the scientific community and also to the business community when it's needed, but while protecting properties and privacy, okay? Without the proper data sharing mechanism, the output of AI is limited, okay? Another thing that we need to do is we need to further develop AI and how AI go together with the scientific method, right? Bring more rigor on AI. You know, the approach, artificial intelligence plus data equal a solution. If we don't make more rigorous, right, has limited application. And then the last piece, it is very important that we develop a proper infrastructure that is able to empower AI in the proper way, right? And also keeping the sustainability of the investment, right? The infrastructure needs to allow us to run artificial intelligence on data much better. And the last point that, in my opinion, is very important to share with each of you is all this needs to be embedded, in new concept of community of discovery working together to tackle these problems. It's not something that, can be handled and tackled from a single country, a single institution, but for some of these problems, while you put all these things together, we have to find better way to work together. And let me speak 2 minutes about method and infrastructure. I told you that AI needs to be better embedded, right, on scientific method and the scientific discovery process. It's important to have method and infrastructure that allow us to extract the knowledge that is available around a subject, to augment eventually this knowledge through simulation, okay? And then use AI with the new methods, for example, generative model, to create hypotheses, right, around a certain problems and to search a solution. And then again, AI can help us also to accelerate the testing of our hypothesis. So in other words, supercomputing and AI can help us, if we do things right, to overboost the scientific method. That is what we do need now, okay? To do that, we do strongly believe that, yes, we have conventional approaches that were coming from conventional supercomputing, but these things has to come together and fuse, right, with new approaches on computing that make, artificial intelligence algorithm implementation more sustainable, and eventually also convergence with quantum computing. All these, right, eventually delivered with a platform that allow, application to be run in a seamless way, in a very, very transportable way, and with the maximum interoperability, okay? So these 2 things are must for us in order to really accelerate the impact of AI and supercomputing. The last thing that I want to spend few words is this concept of community of discovery. To me, even if we have an infrastructure, even if we have the right algorithm, right, even if we make the full things more rigorous, without collaboration and scales, all these infrastructure and approaches will not get, impact to scale. And example, and this COVID strongly accelerated this. It's possible to do it. Think about community of discovery like the COVID High Performance Computing Consortium generated in the United States. We have helped to create this, but then, developed worldwide. 80 projects on COVID, 40 consortium members, or a similar initiative, and by the way, they are collaborating, that were put together in Europe exactly to bring simulation and AI, right, in the right ecosystem to solve the problems. And in this particular case, try to find a solution for COVID. Few examples here. They already been mentioned by, drug repositioning. 1,500 already FDA approved the drugs, okay? 7,000 that are in the process to be approved. Using AI and supercomputing, we have demonstrated that we can go from this number to few, and then if we have the right ecosystem, eventually go to rapid testing, okay? But all this only possible if we are able to create this concept of global collaboration. And I finish saying that, if we are able to do this, this is not going to solve only and to tackle only the COVID problems. But for example, will help us, as you can see in this list, we are trying to push this from the company to solve many other problems that we do have in our world. And I stop here. Thank you for attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alessandro, for your presentation and the very clear messages you shared with us. I would like to bring in Jacques now for the last speech. Last but not least, of course. Over to you, Jacques.
I must say thanks so much for inviting me. And I I was going to present a few slides. I don't think I will do so. I will try to elaborate a bit more about the points that have been made so far, which, by the way, I find extremely powerful, and I fully agree with most of them. But I will try to make three messages here. The very first one is that whatever happened to the COVID or the AI power of some of the algorithms, the point that we need to remind us is that we are at the moment at the tipping point of moving into a real fundamental knowledge economy. And that paradigm by itself, it's no way out. And that means it takes time to build Roma. It will take time to build all the elements, the building block, to make sure that we are full into the knowledge economy benefits that we want to see. But I'm very optimistic that this is something that would be for the good. The point number two I want to elaborate on is that a proof that this is possibly more than a bet is that there is a global race, and everyone is trying to take a piece of that new architecture, that new value chain, to make sure that they can benefit from the knowledge economy. And that race today has been a race which maybe we think that Europe is not necessarily good at, but I would say that the fundamental question is not that. The question is that in that race, is the race fair enough to make sure that everybody can benefit? And I will argue it's not the case at this stage. But three, I will also make a point about Europe, because actually we're talking about Europe at this stage. I don't think we should be negative. Europe has multiple paths for the future where it can actually benefit substantially and be a major player into the AI / supercomputing game. So let's go to each of these points one by one. The very first one is, and I think it has been said very well from a representative from IBM, we're moving to a knowledge economy. And that knowledge economy, there is fundamental paradigm shift. Let me take the example of economics, because I've got myself a PhD in economics. And economics is based on two basic principles, which you will see are no longer valid in the future of the AI supercomputing world. The very first one is that we have so many complex problems. In economics, the way we solve complexity is to go at the margin. We go always the marginal delta, such that we simplify mega problems and the complexity, because at the margins, the linear approximation is so tiny that you are pretty sure to be good, but you don't solve the problem at the systemic level. And the second axis of economic science has been testing. And in social science, as you know, it's very difficult to replicate experiments. So we've got statistical methods that try to go always to say, if you can prove that something is statistically different from the mainstream, then we can move. So you see that with these two elements of paradigm, you solve only problem at the margin, and you only can move on if you find something which is statistically robustly different from what you know, which with small data is usually not the case that often. So you are basically in a statu quo model. In the AI world, you will go for much more complex problem, and you have with big data many replicability that you can do. And that's the power of supercomputing. That's the power of AI algorithms and deep learning, which is that we are there to solve complex systems with possibly very different answers than the answers at the margin, and possibly can replicate and test it. Now, this being said, I also agree with the fact that for that system to work, we're going to need to change a bit of the architecture. This is true today that the supercomputing model has been much more parallel computing to include much more power into crunching data, if you like. But we all know that whatever system we moved on, the architecture needs to evolve. We've seen that between the PC, even the mobile. So obviously, if it moves to the AI, it will be the case as well. It also means that given the paradigm change, if we think about complex problem and we think about replicability, we need enough of clean data, enough of good real-time data, and it requires collaboration and solving issues like privacy and incentive for people to share and collaborate this data. So all that will not be done in one day. But again, the point I wanted to make here is that we are at the beginning of that knowledge economy with a paradigm shift that requires that we build the building blocks. Supercomputing is one of that. AI tools are one of that. Data, cloud, architecture are another blocks of that. And all those blocks need to work out. It will take time, but I believe we are already well ahead into that fantastic journey for the future. So comes the second point, which is, where do we stand today? As I said, let's not look at this as saying, well, it's not working as quickly as we think. Still believe today that the tens of cases of AI that I've seen are obviously most of the time very restricted, but in one way, the gain productivity, the gain in innovation system, the collaboration tools that I've seen coming from that are so promising. And personally, I think that the uplift in productivity coming from these knowledge economy tools are going to be fantastic, even if today, obviously not all the cases are working the way we want, but most of the time, it's not because the technology is not working, it's because the architecture bottleneck, is because the data is still small data, or data are not clean enough. So there's still a lot of things to solve, but it's not from the power of the AI and the supercomputing architecture that we should claim that it's not working. It's the missing blocks that are not necessarily all organized to make it work. The only issue is that if you look today at the market as it stands, this is a market which, again, taking my hat as an economist, I would say is very concentrated. If you look today at any elements of computer visions, AI services, even robotics, the Erfindal index, which measure the concentration level of domains, is in the range for computer vision is up to 50%, which means that give and take, 2 firms globally could run the computer vision worldwide. And in robotics, it's in the range of 25%, which means that 4 firms, global firms, could run that world globally. Obviously, it's the beginning of those technologies, but definitely this is a power that needs to be worked out, or at least watched out. Now, funnily enough, of course, Europe is not that bad. It's good in some of the robotics, is good in application of AI services, but this is where the market is the less concentrated, and where is not very good at is in computer vision, NLPs, machine learning, and the like. So, which reflects the point that yes, we need to watch out for that control. And last but not least, watch out on the way people try to continue the control. And there are basically 2 ways to go. One way is the patent race, and we see, for instance, much more Asia, where patentability or the proportion of firms making patents is being extremely high, in the range of 60%, and is driven also with a public-private partnership. Then you got the other extreme, which is the standardization battle, which is happening in the US, where some of the large players are obviously not necessarily patenting a lot of things, but are using their power to de facto creating standards. We talk about tensor. Tensor processing is obviously a very good innovation, but in the same time, it can lead to a certain way of pushing certain type of crunching data and standardization, which at the end of the day is something to be solved. Having said that, we are at the beginning of the journey, and I believe that there are multiple European paths for the future. One still to make a point, this is something that Europe should do, but it should not miss the boat. We've seen that in the technology race, when somebody gets it wrong, it gets it wrong for a long, long time. Japan in the 80s were extremely good in consumer electronics. They didn't overspill that to AI at this stage, except in the pure robotics. China and US are possibly 2 part of the world having they say in the AI. Let's not miss obviously India, with a very young population, and actually 70% of the stock of digital talents is actually happening in India. And India has an outsourcing service strategy from which they have outsourced a lot of the service from the US and from the Anglo-Saxon countries. So India is not that and possibly will push that. Having said that, what are the three paths, and I will finish on that, what are the three paths Europe could do given all that evolutions? The very first one, and I think most of the people from the Commission and from the Parliament have already said so, but I think that we are sometimes seen as overly regulating from the Europe point of view. I disagree with that term. It's about adequacy of regulations. I think the open data is going to be fundamental to make sure that SMEs, but also everybody has a playing field to use the data, because data is a public good. LGBT has been a very good aspect of all you treat, obviously, part of the privacy issues. So I believe that expanding on the regulation, especially from the adequacy of the playing field, is definitely something Europe needs to do. And Europe has the power to do it, because the balance today between excessive patenting and de facto standardization leads to concentration, which at the end of the day, regulation must solve. Point number two, is there a strategy at the frontier for Europe? Well, we talk already about the fact that Europe leads in supercomputing. I would say it's fantastic. I will also make the warning that watch out, supercomputing as a parallel programming and computing power is good, but most of the application of AI will possibly lead to a very different architecture, possibly more at the edge if we want AI to be successful. I think that's a point that has been already made. But also Europe as robotics is actually having its fair share in AI services. So we should continue to push downstreams to get that lead. And finally, on that path, I think there is no path where AI should be taken if it's not merged with sustainability and vice versa. Interestingly, Europe can differentiate in that race because the US is not necessarily that's in the sustainability game, and China is moving a bit of that, but at the end of the day, still a lot to learn from that perspective. And also think about the convergence that ICT, AI will have with sustainability. What I mean by that is that the sectors that were lagging in digital maturity are likely to become much more digital because of sustainability. If you think about manufacturing, which is traditionally lagging, it takes to be much more sustainable and to create circular economic solutions. We're going to need extreme digitization where the full supply chain is totally digitized to have seamless open data flows such that the synchronization of the value chain exists. If you think about the sector like energy, it's quite evident that energy to be green will have to go to a system of distributed grids, for instance, which requires obviously an ICT layer. And last but not least, if you think of sectors that are leading on ICT, they will need sustainability themselves. That's the issues of how you consume excessive energies in the context of AI. Last but not least, the path three that Europe can take. Adequate regulation is one, differentiate frontier strategy is another one. The path three is that despite what people claim, we have a very large, vibrant digital ecosystem of startup. We have 75% of AI services coming from very young, small AI driven firms in Europe. In contrast, it's barely 30% in China because China is now very large firms, possibly with a layer of public-private partnership. We've got not only the countries, the way that we think about Europe, but we have the regions, and we see a lot of regional clusters and connections happening within the European market that basically create that digital ecosystem much more vibrant. And last but not least, we start to see an emergence of the VC industry, where there's a new culture of coaching of digital startup. I told you that I was part of an advisory board for Fortino Capital. That's an example of a company that basically create that VC structure for the bet that the large, vibrant digital ecosystem can emerge in Europe. So last but not least, the point I wanted to make again is that Rome is not done in one day. Two, it's the future is here. We have to shape it. And three, Europe has a lot to say. And what he has done so far in regulation, in supercomputing, or in developing the startup ecosystem is actually something that needs to be scaled, but it's a promising start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacques. You gave us a lot of food for thought, for sure. We will now move to the Q&A session, where we will continue the conversation with our audience as well. We will take questions from the audience, and participants now only have to click on the Q&A session button, or otherwise on the link that will be shared in the chat box. We'll see you there.